We're only 2 weeks away from a full release and hopefully the FAQ dropping pretty quickly after the match play guide comes out, and we have now seen the full contents of the book. Given that this only dropped yesterday, I haven't had a full chance to go through, have a good considered think about what the difference the mission play is going to make, and potentially the scoring change as well. So what I want to do is break this video up into two parts. Today I want to talk about the army composition. This is very similar to the Throne of Skulls comp that was run, I want to say, about 4 or 5 months ago. So I've actually spent quite a lot of time thinking about how this affects armies, and I've got thoughts that I can put out and feel confident standing behind. I want to spend a little bit more time thinking about the missions and how that's going to affect things, probably get some practice games in. So the second part of this video is going to come probably tomorrow evening or maybe Monday, depending on how much time I've got to get some testing in. So what I wanted to do today is look at the base army composition changes, what that means for the game and what that means for each specific army. First things first, there are 3 ways to play, and that's a little bit confusing because there's the Grand Melee and the Combined Arms, which are likely going to be used in combination with each other. But first of all, there's Open War, and that's just the game that we've been playing it as it stands, without any comp, without any sort of limitations other than what are on your, army roster. Nothing changes there. Then we've got the Grand Melee. This is apparently making a shift away from mighty wizards and all-conquering lords of war, which I would say it doesn't do very well, but it does cap them to some extent. So players are encouraged to field diverse armies of infantry, cavalry, and chariotry, rather than rely too heavily on the might of monsters, characters, or excessively large units, and then there's some restrictions. I will say I don't think that these restrictions do it. I'm hoping that the things that come, the changes in the mission pack, will incentivize, more scoring units, which they do, so we'll talk about that later in the week. But then also the other change I'd like to see is I'd like to see some changes in the FAQ as well. So make it so that there are less reasons for me to just slam down 2 dragons. I love slamming down 2 dragons. I'm probably going to keep slamming down 2 dragons. But make it so that I have to, it's less of an obvious choice for the armies that don't have much else going for them. Make the other stuff better, Anyway, so the restrictions are, you cannot spend more than 25% of your army's total points value on a single character or unit. This hits specifically a couple of armies, and it doesn't really hit anything else. The thing that's different about this from the Throne of Skulls comp is this is a single character or unit. I'm pretty sure it was just characters previously, but when that was written, the Royal Host Death Star didn't really exist in as more than, it had been around, but it wasn't a particularly dominant force, and now we've seen a little bit more of it. So Warriors of Chaos are the big army that are going to take some changes here. Your army may include any number of level 1 or 2 wizards, but may only include 0 to 1 level 3 wizard per 1,000 points, and 0 to 1 level 4 wizard per 2,000 points. This is interesting. So, as it stands, there are a few armies that this hits specifically, thinking of you Orcs and Goblins, Empire, and Mortuary Cult. Maybe Vampire counts as well, but I think they're a little bit more immune to it. It doesn't actually make much difference. You know where it would make a difference? If tournament organisers decided to play at 1,999 points. I don't necessarily know that I want to do that, but this level of restriction paired with playing, instead of the full 2,000, 1,999 or 1,999 plus 1, so you've got the restrictions of you can only have, 1 per 1,000 because you haven't got the full 2,000 points. There's maybe something in there. I think that would probably have unintended effects for a lot of the less good armies. A lot of the armies of Infamy do have, you can take one of these per 1,000 points, and that's sort of usually your only good core choice or something like that. So if you're looking at the Wild Hunt, for example, you can have 1 unit of Wild Riders per 1,000 points. If you're at, just under 2,000 points, I don't think anyone was really worried about me running 2 units of Wild Riders in my core, but I wouldn't be able to. I'd have to run more Glade Riders, I guess, which is not a particularly appealing thought for that detachment. So maybe something to play around with, but I think it might, with the way that the army composition lists work at the moment, might be an issue. However, by the by, so those are the points in terms of the actual changes there, and then we've also got Combined Arms, and again, it says that tournament organisers can run any of these or any combination of these. I expect to see Grand Melee and Combined Armed run together. That's going to be the standard match play experience. So Combined arms, you are restricted to a certain number of units, and this is something that isn't really going to change how most people play, because most places have adopted a rule of 3, and a lot of places have adopted a rule of 6 for core. So that means you can only have 3 of the same unit, but if it's a core unit, you can have 6 of the same unit. There's only really 2 armies that would want to have more than 3 of the same unit, and I would say that is Lizardmen and Beastmen for Skinks and the Razorgore, But yeah, I don't think this is going to make too much of a change. What we are seeing here is it's not a flat 0 to 3 across the board. It's 0 to 3 to characters, 0 to 4 to core, so you can go a little bit heavier there, 0 to 3 to special, 0 to 2 to rare, and then also mercenary. There's not a lot of your armies this affects, but there are a few that this would theoretically nerf. So Lizardmen, if you're playing sort of the Grand Army, you're not playing the Renegades pack, you probably want to be running 6 units of Lizardmen, of Skinks if you can. This obviously stops that entirely. Beastmen, I think Beastmen players would love to run for Razorgore. Weirdly, all the Beastmen lists I've seen have pretty much capped at 3. I guess maybe we've just seen a shift from the rule of 6 to rule of 3 at most events. But yeah, I think this doesn't make too much difference. I think I would have quite liked to have seen 0 to 3 applying to characters become 0 to 2 applying to characters, so you're not going too heavy into them. I think that would make it more likely that we saw a little bit more variety. I believe the way that this works, though, is this doesn't go on unit sheet. So this would go, for example, for High Elves, I've got Lords and Nobles. I think I could run 3 Nobles and then still run 2 Lords, and that would be 2 Lords capped at 0 to 1 per 1,000. So if I was playing 3,000 points, I could run 3 Lords, 3 Nobles. That's how I read that anyway. If you disagree, if there's some wording in there that I've missed, please do let me know, because it is still very fresh. So if we're thinking that it's going to be just 3 per data sheet, the little scroll where you've got the Noble and Lord combined with the different stats but the same special rules, maybe it's 0 to 3 there. But yeah, if that is the case, please do let me know in the comments. These numbers increase by 1 for a full 1,000 points of game size above 2,000 points, and units taken as detachment do not count towards these limits. I like that. I think some armies are going to be able to use this much better. So for example, Cathay is an example. I'm not saying that you want to run 1,000,000 units of Jade Warriors, but you could theoretically run 4 units of Jade Warriors and then 8 detachments of Jade Warriors as well. It's probably not good, but it gives you some flexibility there, and I think that's fine. Just a quick note here, it is important to note that these limitations do not apply to named characters, and mercenaries are always permitted, and then allies are whatever. So, why is this important? For most armies, this doesn't matter at all. I don't think, off the top of my head, there are any named characters that are over 500 points. So if we're talking specifically at 2,000 points, it doesn't make a difference, but it does allow you to bring, Gulrock at 1,500 points, I guess, something like that. The other thing that matters here is that you can run multiple wizards. So I'm not sure this is the intention. So right now, I can run Great Brave Shaman, a level 4, and I can also run Kralmore, a level 4. I think the intention was so that you could run named characters like Kralmore at 1,000 points or at 1,500 points. I think it's an unintended effect where we're actually getting the ability to just double up on level 4 wizards. I don't know that it's a huge deal. Up until now, there haven't been many great level 4 wizards, and this would have been written before we had good level 4 wizards in the game out in play, because there's usually a 6 to 8 month lead time on getting things printed physically, because they don't print them in this country, they ship it over to China. Anyway, by the by. But we've just had Kralmore printed, who is a decent level 4 caster, and then we've also got Mao Ying, who is also a decent level 4 caster. So this opens up factions, a couple of factions specifically, the ability to run 2 level 4s where everyone else only runs level 3. Warriors of Chaos could do it before with Gulrock. Gulrock's bad. You probably don't see Gulrock. Maybe you do. Maybe you do. Maybe the change to Chaos Dragons makes it more appealing. But yeah, anyway. I'm not expecting to see Gulrock. But it is interesting to note that these don't apply to named characters. And it's the same over here as well for the combined arms. Although I think that's less relevant. I guess if you've got a named character that is a specific type of hero level character, like I think Corhill is maybe... No, I'm not sure. Anyway, it allows you to circumvent the restrictions to some degree. So what are the faction-specific changes? Well, starting off with dwarves, and this is kind of just for all of them, there's no major changes, and that is a minor buff because some of the best armies in the game get a little bit worse with the changes that have come in. So dwarves, not really much of a change. The only real difference is, and this is not just for dwarves, this is for any army that wants to take one Death Star, one 500-point unit to fill out their core. It's slightly harder to do that because you've got to get to exactly 500 points. What I think we'll see is any army that wants to do like a core Death Star probably ends up running about 450 points in the Death Star, and then 50 points in another core unit. Just whatever the cheapest thing is, because it turns out it's actually really hard to get 500 points on the nose when you've got like a 16-point model or a 14 or a 12-point model. It doesn't add up correctly, so you've got to make some changes. But yeah, no major changes. Dwarves looking good. Pretty happy with the things that come in. Happy that they don't have to face as many dragons with triple saves, so not too bad there. Bretonia, all armies. There's no major changes here again, but again, minor buffs. The big buff here is that the Chaos Dragon can't take an Ogre Blade and Enchanting Aura, so the Virtue of Heroism Lord, which typically you use as your bully piece to stop dragons from, running around and just crushing you, and to really sort of pin them in and then get a huge amount of points if you do actually need to go for the charge. You now just win the fight into pretty much every dragon. There's no dragon that can kill you before you get to swing. There's nothing that's going to make you strike last, so you're always going to be able to get in there. Dragons also generally become squishier. The High Elf Dragon can still go triple save, but you've lost the ability to go triple save and also put, an Opal Amulet in there. If you've lost the 2-up ward save, Bretonia, really happy about that. They're going to be able to killing blow you a lot more consistently. So maybe there is a build that High Elves can get a single Opal Amulet in, but they'd have to sacrifice something. Not 100% sure how that one's going to work. Gonna have to play around with it for my armies, but I'd say all Bretonia do get a small buff here. Empire get a minor nerf, so you can't run multiple wizards anymore, and that is one of the better things you could be doing with wizards. Sorry, you can't run multiple level 4 wizards. You can still run 3 wizards, but 2 of them are going to be level 3. The problem with that is that wizards they don't have any signature spells, and they don't have any spell familiars. So, because you haven't got a signature spell, you haven't got something you can consistently swap into. There's no magic missile that you can just pick up because you exist as a faction. Looking at you, Warriors of Chaos. You haven't got a spell familiar, so you can't go. Your level 4 wizard gets a 5th spell, and then the level 3 goes for a lore familiar, and that's a good level of consistency in terms of picking your spells. You can still run the level 4 and the 2 level 3s, but you already struggled with consistency, and now it's going to be worse. The level 4 wizard that was taking Arcane Familiar, so you were going to be rolling 3 in Battle Magic, and then 1 in Demonology, and just taking the Summoning, the Magic Missile signature spell. That also gets a nerf because now you're only rolling 2 spells in Battle Magic, so you're even less likely to get Pillar of Fire or Fireball. I think there's a downside here. I will say it's not the only way you can play Empire. You can run them with 1 wizard very happily. You can still run a level 4 and a level 3 with Lore Familiar and not be too upset. It's not a huge nerf there. And dragons do get squishier. One of the things that you struggle with is killing dragons, and if people still want to bring, for example, a Chaos Dragon, they're not going to be running a triple save dragon anymore. Dragons getting squishier is, I would say, a little bit of a buff for Empire, because those triple cannons, double Hellblasters, gives them a little bit more agency in ripping through all of that toughness 6, multiple wounds, multiple saves, now that the saves are less multiple than they were before. High Elves, all armies. I would say High Elves have come out very well from this little change here. They got minor to maybe moderate buffs. They now have the best dragons in the game, and I think this is now inarguable. Before, you could say, if you're looking at it as a package, the Warriors of Chaos Dragon is probably best, especially when you factor in that they've got the Warpfire Dragon, which on top of, having like a triple save, absolute killer that gets better, or an Ogre Blade Lord that can get up to 7 attacks or 8 attacks, depending on how you roll. Now that's gone away for Warriors of Chaos. The Wood Elf Dragon has got worse. I think the High Elf Dragon is probably the best one. You can still go triple save. You do have to give something up. You can't go triple save and then also Opal Amulet, so maybe you work around with Blood of Calidor, play around with the Impetuous. There's some things that we can probably do there for High Elves, but this is a relatively buff, because our dragon gets 2% worse or 5% worse. Everyone else's dragon gets, 10 or 15% worse. There is also minor nerfs to some poison Death Stars, and this is less of a thing than you actually think it might be, but Royal Host specifically is pretty heavily capped in terms of the numbers of shots that they can put out, so this is better than it was. I'm not upset to see this change coming in. Most of the poison Death Stars were coming in at 500 points or less anyway, so this isn't a major thing, but it's nice to have. Also, they're not an army that were really spamming rare choices or running multiple level 4s, so there is a build where you would run 2 level 4s and you'd go for the Sisters of Avalon Death Star in core. You can still do that, you just go level 4 and a level 3, you lose 30 points in terms of, one of them stops being a level 4, one becomes a level 3 caster, you just put a couple more power scrolls in, something like that. I don't think it's an issue at all. Yeah, I think this is fine. High Elves have come out pretty well in the wash, and although it's too early to say, obviously this is my army, I'm thinking that they're looking pretty decent in terms of the other change in the book. So I'm really excited to dig into the mission changes, work out how I'm best going to play around with High Elves, or any of the other elves for the mission changes. Wood Elves. I'd say these are very minor nerfs. So I have been on the no Wood Elf Dragon train. The reason for that is it's so squishy. You can, at best, or before now, at best, you could get a 4-up armor save and a 5-up ward. In a world of poison shooting, I didn't think that was very consistent or reliable. I was really worried about how well it was going to do. But it did have the best melee output in a challenge. You can no longer run the really good dragon that was loaded up with Ogre Blade, Talisman of Protection, Annoyance of Netlings, and then recently the Aspect of the Cat as well to give you rerolls in a challenge. What that gave you was, especially if you stacked the Befuddlement of Mischiefs on there as well, a lot of enemy challenge, enemy lords were going to be hitting you on 5s or maybe 6s, I can't remember the exact interaction. So they were going to be hitting you pretty inconsistently. You were going to be hitting them on 3s, you were going to be re-rolling with the Aspect of the Cat, you have an Ogre Blade, so you're going to be chunking through them. You were relatively tanky in terms of you were hard to hit and you had a ward save in there as well. That build's gone, so that's a shame. I think, and I'd have to double check this, I'm pretty sure you can still run the triple save build that's popped up recently actually. Let me double check that one and get back to you. Okay, quick addendum to what I was saying about High Elves. Wood Elves can run a triple save dragon. It's triple save, air quotes, because the way that you get the triple save is you buy the Mantle of Rebirth, the 40-point magic armor, sorry. It is light armor, so combining that with a shield, you're only ever going to have a 5-up armor save. In melee, you're limited on points. You're probably just running, a great weapon and then Resplendent of Luminescence as well, so you've got magical attacks in there. I think this is a good build, but I wouldn't call it a triple save build, because in combat you've got a 6-up armor save and then a 5-up ward and a 5-up regen. But I would say that that's a very consistent build. I think that's good. It's just not a triple save build in reality. Anyway, that's the direction that you'd probably go in if you want to run a dragon now. You can't go for the more killy build. And I'd say as well, if there's a slight buff in terms of Death Stars being nerfed. You'd think that Wood Elves would be good against Death Stars because, Death Stars have got to be slow and immobile, right? Not in this version of the game. For a Death Star to work in this game, you really have to be able to teleport around the board, double move, so, we're seeing the Richer Yeet, the Longbeard unit that's going to be in marching column, Vanguard 3 inches, March 12 inches in marching column because they've got the cart there, double move with the Anvil of Doom as well. That's the sort of mobility that we're looking at. You end up with something like a 23-inch move or something ridiculous like that. Or you're looking at the Poison Death Stars, which are a ranged Death Star, so they're not actually bad into Wood Elves. They teleport around the board with TMP. A lot of those are undead. If you're looking at, for example, Tomb Kings, they hit on 5s without penalties. Seeing these things nerfed to an extent is a little bit of a buff for the faction. You also just don't have the chip damage to deal with Death Stars, so if melee Death Stars that aren't super fast make a comeback, I think Wood Elves do well into those, but right now our Death Stars are very mobile and very ranged, so seeing them that get nerfed is good in general for Wood Elves as a faction. I'm not entirely sure which direction I want to take Wood Elves in. I'm getting more and more interested in playing around with Wild Riders. I think they're interesting, and I'm really hopeful that the Falconhorn does take a nerf in the FAQ, because I think at that point Wild Hunt with the a couple of units of the Warhawks with the upgrade to give them Furious Charge, I think that becomes pretty interesting. Needs playing around with, but yeah, I'm actually pretty excited to play some Wood Elves. I think they're a fun faction, and there's a lot to be but dug into, whereas the other two elf factions are kind of solved at the moment. Orcs and Goblins Grand Army. This is probably the army that gets hit the worst, and the reason for that is they're losing multiple level 4 casters. They need their multiple 4-level casters for their sort of classic poison build, and the reason for that is they haven't got any consistency in terms of their spell casting. They don't have any way to get pluses to their cast. They've got, one item that gives them range and a reroll to a cast. That's nice. They can take power scrolls. That's nice. They haven't got any spell familiars. If they take a lore familiar, which you're probably going to have to do here, I think you're probably just going to have to suck it up and take a lore familiar on one of your level 3s. You lose the ability to take Itchy Nuisance, which is obviously an incredibly strong spell. This is a big hit for the faction. If you want to do the Poison Death Star, this is a hit to the faction because you are losing consistency in your spells. Often you'd see a level 4 caster with Travel Mystical Pathways, and then 2 level 4 casters with War Magic, fishing for Evil Sun Shining. That was sort of like the consistent build that I was seeing for the Death Star. This takes a huge nerf. Going down to level 3s means that you drop significantly in your chance of not getting the spell. You go from a 1 in 9 to, I think, a 1 in 4, off the top of my head, just napkin maths, to not get Evil Sun Shining. So again, absolutely huge nerf, not something you're happy about. You may end up having to put the Elementalism caster as the level 3, and then run a level 4 and a level 3 without Lore Familiar in War Magic. But even that doesn't feel great, because then you're losing consistency on getting the spells off. Travel Mystical Pathways and Plague of Rust are so important to get off, and if you were facing up against, any dragon with magic resist, although admittedly that is harder to do now, it was really important to have the casting value to squeeze through that magic resist into the, or to squeeze through like a good dispel threat, someone who's got +1 to dispel and extra range. You really wanted to get through that in terms of getting that Plague of Rust off so you could actually kill the dragon. So this is a big nerf for Orcs and Goblins Grand Army. On the other hand, if we look at the Armies of Infamy, no real changes. Troll Horde and Nomadic War, neither of them are super competitively focused, which is fine. An army doesn't have to be the most top-of-the-line tournament list for it to be worth playing or worth thinking about. I don't think either of these take major changes. Troll Horde, you were probably taking Ogdras, and then you might have taken another level 4 caster, so that's fine. Remember, the special characters are immune to any of the changes, so that's not something that we need to worry about for Ogdras, even though he's a level 3. For Nomadic War, you weren't taking multiple casters. You can't hit 500 points with your characters. You probably weren't taking 500 points in a single unit, although shout out to Rebecca Robson, who did do that for Espot 2, I think it was. Absolute hero, playing a just massive Death Star of Nomadic War Orcs. Orc Ball Boys. But yeah, no, there's not really much of a change here for either of the Armies of Infamy, which I think is a good thing. Warriors of Chaos, and this is more specifically Grand Army. I haven't done a slide for the other two, but for Grand Army, this is one of the factions that takes the biggest nerfs. I'd say it's a moderate nerf. I wouldn't say it's huge, but it is reasonably sized. Dragons being capped at 500 points makes them significantly worse. If you want to take a Chaos Lord on a dragon, you can take, I think you can take a shield, a flail, and 2 Favors of the Gods. Obviously, you've got a ward save built in, which is really nice, but you can't actually juice them up with any of the things that made them good. So that's probably the death knell for Warriors of Chaos on dragons, I'm assuming. Remains to be seen what the rest of the meta looks like. Maybe just having a Chaos Lord and Dragon with a great weapon or a flail is good enough, and it's worth playing around with. But right now it looks to me like the Chaos Lord on Dragon is somewhat dead, because it is significantly worse than it was, and because they have other good options. If they didn't have other good options, I'd expect to see dragons still, kicking around, but you can just put the Lord on a demonic steed or on a regular horse, and I think both are really good. So we probably see more people swapping towards that style of play. A lot of people were doing that anyway, but I think the dragon takes a backseat. Still see the Warpfire dragon though, that hasn't changed. The level 4 cap also nerfs the other common build, which is the Cavalry Death Star with 2 casters. Now this isn't the biggest nerf, but it is worth mentioning, because I'm saying that if we're going to move away from the dragon build and then towards the Cavalry Death Star, Ogre Blade Lord on a horse, couple of casters in there, 1 battle magic to do some range damage, and also provide you with Arcane Urgency, which is a very key piece to the list. The other one, Demonology. This does nerf you. Both wizards wanted to use signature spells. One of them wants to use the Nurgle plus Toughness spell. One of them wants to use the Tzeentch, Blue Fire of Tzeentch, the doing extra damage at range. It's not the end of the world. This is the first faction that wants to run multiple casters that we've come across that does actually have a spell familiar. So what you can do is you can go a level 4 with a lore familiar, which is probably going to be the demonology caster. You just pick the spells that you want. You accept that you're not going to get the toughness Nurgle signature spell. That's fine, is what it is. And then you also take the spell familiar as well. And you put that on the blue fire caster, the Markazinj caster, roll your 5 battle magic spells, swap one into blue fire. It still works pretty well. It is a little bit worse than it was, but worth mentioning. As for Wolves of the Sea, I'd say that is completely unchanged, so slight buff. In fact, I think with the potential nerf for dragons across the board, you'll still see them, I think, with these rules, but with dragons getting a little bit worse, dragons were one of the things that the Wolves of the Sea list would struggle to deal with, in my opinion, so I think that gives them a little bit of a buff. And Heralds of Darkness, my love, this is a mild to moderate buff for Heralds of Darkness, and I'm being cautious about saying this. I still don't think that you're going to see them do well at tournaments. However, if we're in a world where we're not seeing Warriors of Chaos, Lords on Dragons, we might see Lords on Chosen Chariots. I really want to see Lords on Chosen Chariots. I really want to do well with Lords on Chosen Chariots. So maybe that's a goal that I set for myself post-WTC or coming into 2026. But yeah, I think there is, because the rest of Warriors of Chaos got comparably nerfed, Heralds of Darkness are slightly better. Still probably don't see them. Still don't think there's enough reason to see them. On to Beastmen. There are no major changes, which is a minor buff. The double level 4 is capped, which before the Arcane Journal would have been a bit of a nerf. One of the builds that we do see for Beastmen is just go, here's 2 level 4 casters, here's 3 level 2 casters. You can still do that because Kralmor is a named character, which means he is completely exempt from these changes. I'm not really 100% sure why they put that in for the level 4, like for the wizard casting. I think if they just said, oh, you can run special characters that are outside of the cap zone, maybe it's so you can run special characters at under 2,000 points. Anyway, at 2,000 points, it doesn't matter. You can run a level 4 Great Bray Shaman, with the Vile Tide, Hagtree Fetish, and then you can run Kralmor as your other one, and then you can still run 3 level 2s. Again, just to call back to what we were saying, if we do think that the cap is for specifically the data sheet, so Great Bray Shamans and Shamans are limited together, this would be a little bit of a nerf for the faction, but I don't necessarily know that it's the direction that you want to go into. The Poison Ungobrick never got near 500 points, so that's fine. And Rule of 4 in core is a buff / nerf to Razor Gore, depending on what you were doing. It's weird. I've called this a buff for Beastmen, and I've called it a nerf for Lizardmen. And the reason for that is the only Lizardman player I see plays mostly at events where there is Rule of 6, so he can take 6 units of Skinks, or has recently moved over to Renegades. Whereas Beastmen, typically I see Beastmen respecting the Rule of 3, so you typically see 3 Razor Gore. Anyway, now that we can put 4 Razor Gore into core for Beastmen, I think that's just a straight buff for Beastmen. I really like it. It's not huge, but 4 Razor Gore, 2 Tuskgore Chariots, and then a couple of, a small unit of Ungor, small unit of Gore, something like that, probably going to be fairly standard for Beastmen core. So, Beastmen pretty happy about this, and also dragons losing their triple saves, mostly, makes it easier for their Doom Balls who are set up to try and deal with them in combat, makes that a little bit easier for them as well. So, Beastmen very happy about these shakeups. Also, again, I've been thinking about Beastmen a lot. They're going to be really happy with objective play. They have a lot of pressure on the map. They have a lot of presence on the map. So we'll get to that in a couple of days' time. But Beastmen looking pretty, I think. They've definitely gone up in my estimation. Tomb King's Grand Army. This is specifically Grand Army. No major changes. They're going to play pretty much the same as they were. Their Poison Brick, they would typically run about 48 archers. That's nowhere near 500 points. Super fine. They're dragons. If they wanted to run dragons, way under 500 points. You can run 2 dragons and, another character or 2 on foot with Tomb Kings, so super fine there. They only ran a single level 4. You weren't seeing 2 level 4s because you need to have a prince or a king. You need to have a level 2 or a level 4 wizard. They'll just go one of each. That's typically how Grand Army goes. You even sometimes go, 2 dragons where you've got your Hierophant, your Tomb Priest on a dragon. You've also got your King on a dragon. And again, you've still got points to put in a BSB there if you want to, which BSB is really strong for undead. So Tomb King's looking fine. And again, no major changes. This means it's a minor buff. They do like the nerf to triple saves on dragons. Dragons becoming a little bit, less tanky if we're seeing less people take, like, the regen on Chaos Dragons, for example. This makes Poison Brick slightly better. So yeah, minor buffs there. Royal Host. This is probably the faction I think that has been nerfed the most. And we will probably see an adaptation in how this plays. And that's great, because I think that the way that it was playing was not super fun for anyone. It's pretty dull. I've played some games with it. I've played games against it. I know a couple of people who run it who have said they're willing to play it, but the games are incredibly dull. Once you know how to play against it, you will typically never win games because it's so hard to squeeze points out of it, but you'll typically never lose games by much. It's like a lot of 10-10s or like 9-11s. It's not a big thing there, so I'm pretty happy to see this getting some sort of level of nerf. You're capped at 84 models if you want to put the Amulet of the Serpent and the Banner of the Desert Winds in the unit. You probably stop doing that. You probably take the Amulet out, which gets you another 6 models. I think the Banner of the Desert Winds is really valuable to have in there, though. It gives you reserve move, it gives you Vanguard, and just having that flexibility is really nice because you can't take level 4 casters. You can only take level 2s. It's really hard to TMP around. Also, if you TMP around, you still want to have reserve move. So I think this is a faction that's going to have to take some major retooling. Maybe we go to 2 big units. Maybe we start seeing 1 unit and then some chariots. I'm not 100% sure which direction this goes in, but it really does tone down the 180 or the 140 models that we were seeing for Royal Host, making it a lot more reasonable now. Mortuary Cult, another faction that's taken mild to moderate nerfs. I think this is less severe than the Royal Court? Royal Host. The level 4 cap is, I think, quite big because spell selection while getting the Tomb King signature spells is really important. You either go elementalism, heavy into elementalism or heavy into necromancy, and you typically sort of lean into the other one as well, and then you'll have a level 1 mortuary priest BSB that you've selected illusion or you've selected elementalism, you roll your spell, and then you swap into the Jaff's Curse Blades, so you get the rerolls of 1 to hit with your shooting poison brick. Now, it's not the end of the world, and it does buff the Illusion Dragon build, which was going to be, you've got an Illusion Wizard on a dragon. You only really need 3 of the spells anyway. You're not worried about the bonuses to casting because you're Mortuary Cult, so you can sacrifice some wounds off some swarms, get +3 to cast. Your level 3 is still casting at +6 or +7 if you're in range of the Casket of Souls, so you're not super worried about it in terms of like actually the output, but it's the consistency of getting the spells that you want. Tomb Kings and Vampire Counts have really good signature spells, so you would like to not have to run Lore Familiar if you don't have to. I think this change means that you have to run Lore Familiar. We're probably going to see a level 4 and then a level 3 with a Lore Familiar. So the level 4 is going to take your reserve move spell. Your level 3 will just have to pick 3 spells that you really want. Your level 1 is going to swap into Jaff's Curse Blades. And that's not the end of the world. Maybe we see an adaptation where we take another level 1, or you take another level 3, and that will also go into signature spells while rolling to see what else you get. But yeah, I think this is definitely it's a consistency nerf. So the faction's going to play the same, it's just going to be a little bit worse at doing it. And as I've pointed out, buffs the Illusion Dragon. Also, just to point out here, their Poison Shooting Brick never gets anywhere near 500 points, nor do their Abshabti. I haven't seen anyone run a Death Star of Abshabti over 500 points, but I think I'd like to see that. That would be a hero play. I think it would be terrible, but just put 20 Abshabti in one unit, or as many as you can fit now. Chaos Dwarves, onto the legacy factions. Most of these I'm not going to break down into the regular Grand Army or Legends or the Renegades. There are 1 or 2 that I am going to mention some specifics because I know a lot of people do talk about them. Chaos Dwarves, no major changes. They were only running 1 Sorcerer Prophet anyway. You can already have the Blork War Boss, and this does actually, to be fair, there is a nerf here. It caps you at only 12 Infernal Ironsworn because they're so expensive. For all 6 Chaos Dwarf players, they probably let out a sad laugh. That is a joke, but their Infernal Ironsworn, which is like their chosen Chaos equivalent, super expensive, really hard to fit many of those into a unit. But yeah, I'd say minor buff here. you were often running a Black Orc Warboss who was going to be benefiting from -2 to hit, running them with a regen, running them with a great weapon and a charmed shield. That build gets better at soaking up dragons now that the Chaos Dragon with the Ogre Blade is dead. So I'd say a little bit of a buff there, but otherwise not a huge change to how Chaos Dwarfs play for either set of rules. Dark Elves, no major changes, but I'd say this is a minor nerf. The Dragon Lords were coming in at under 500 points, but if you want to run a Sorceress on Dragon, that was over 500 points. I was running, back when I was playing Dark Elves, it was something like a 470 point Lord and a 530 point Sorceress. Now I can't do that. Now it's still a 470 point Lord, but then it's a 500 point Sorceress, so you lose something, a level of casting or a ward save. Maybe you have to rely on, you know, going for battle magic and getting Oaken Shield and actually casting that, which makes me very uncomfortable. So yeah, need some retooling on the double dragon build, but that's not the only way to play. It's not a huge deal. The other way you can play is, well, one of the other ways you can play, which is a Dragon Lord and then Sorceress, a level 4 and a level 2. I think that's just as good as it was, so I don't want to say that's nerfed. The third build, which was going double level 4 and a single level 2, spamming Pillar of Fire, that was like the not so great in singles. It was okay in singles, but it was mostly to try and combat undead in teams. I think that list gets a nerf, because the way you were doing it was you were taking 2 level 4s, you were leaning on the Tome of Furion, which is not extremely common, so one would have 5 spells, one would have 4 spells, and then the level 2 would have Lore Familiar and 2 Focus Familiars, so that you could definitely get at least, you know, at least 1 Pillar of Fire, probably 2, likely to get 3. That gets worse, because now you've got a level 3, a level 4, and a level 2, which means that you're much less likely to get those spells, very similar to when we were talking about the Orcs and Goblins change. But there's more things you can do with characters for Dark Elves than you can do for Orcs and Goblins, in my opinion, in Grand Army. So, yeah, minor nerf, but not a big deal, I would say. Lizardman Grand Army. Skinks. Now, if you were running 6 units of Skinks, this is a nerf. What the hell do I put my points into if it's not Skinks in core? I don't know. Skinks are the only good thing there. If you were running 3, this is a buff. You get +1 unit of Skinks. You were probably just running units of like 20. Now you can drop them down to units of 14 and run 4 of them. Something like that. There's not a big change here, I would say. It just depends on what your sort of tournament pack was. If you're used to running 6, I'm really sorry. It's going to suck going from 6 to 4. But if you're running 3, it's a little bit of a buff, I would say. Onto the Renegades, no major changes. You weren't running 6 units anyway, because you can run Tomb Guard, and you were going to run a brick of Tomb Guard, you were going to put your Slan in the middle of it, you're going to be really, really happy. So don't even worry about it. You weren't going to be running 4 units, or 6 units, whatever. Ogres, no major changes here. Again, a beneficiary of dragons getting a little bit less punchy, a little bit less tanky. If you were playing the Iron Gut Star, the actual Iron Guts themselves were typically 500 points or less anyway. An Iron Gut Star is when you go, here's a big unit of Iron Guts. I've also got, you know, multiple characters in here, a really killing Tyrant, a Wizard, a BSB, and that's going to be points denial. You run a couple of the cannons, whose name I've forgotten, the... whatever. You know what I mean. The cannon pulled by the Rhinox. A couple of those, and that was the list. You know, it's a very strong denial list. It plays well into certain armies. It can take dragons on the chin. I think it gets better at that. And yeah, you weren't running over 500 points of Iron Guts because you've also had to take a unit of Bulls. So that's about that. Skaven. No major changes for either, you know, Renegade or regular. There's nothing in rare that's worth spamming. It's just, yeah. There's no changes to Skaven. I think this just leaves them pretty much as underwhelming as they were before. I think maybe they get a little bit better if we think about objective scoring, because you've got cheap-ish stuff that you can put on objectives, but yeah, I'm not super sold by Skaven in the current game. I'm hoping that there's some changes in the FAQ that affect them, even though they're a legacy faction. Finally, vampire counts. No major changes, but I would say there's a minor nerf. So they do like wizard levels for rezzing, so they often would be running 2 level 4s. That's the most common build, a couple of level 4s on Mortis Engines and 2 Banshees, or 1 on a Mortis Engine, 1 on foot, 2 Banshees and a BSB, and that unlocks the Graveguard. That's the build that I liked more, and then you go, you know, Graveguard, zombies, and a couple, you know, 1 big unit of Blood Knights. That's the sort of classic, typical build. I think that list gets very slightly worse. I don't think it gets significantly worse. Right now you were running 2 level 4s with a Spell Familiar, and the Spell Familiar is extremely common, so you could have just taken that twice. I think the change that we see now is you go 1 level 4 with a spell familiar, 1 level 3 with a lore familiar, and it's still fine. You're still getting pluses to cast from the Mortis engine, so you don't need to worry about that too much. Maybe you even think, oh, if I can only run a level 3, maybe I just drop the level 3 down to a level 2, and I go with some consistency there. I just pick the spells I want. Maybe not if you're putting it on a Mortis engine, because you do need a ward save as well. But yeah, I'm not super worried about vampire counts. I think they will still continue to be fairly dominant, and I guess maybe because their nerfs are so minor, you could argue that they're actually doing better in the meta, because the sort of comparable caster undead build in Mortuary Cult did get nerfed, so they're looking better as the #1 undead caster build right now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Ground Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Ground Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.